Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to talk about Flame Wraith Necromancer and its potential to be one of the better season starters in 0.9. I want to preface this video with the following. This build is a little annoying to get set up. It takes a Flame Wraith idol and an Aberrents Call to start functioning properly, but thankfully Necromancer has a lot of easy to use options to play until you acquire these two items. It shouldn't take longer than a day or two to acquire them. Last Epoch is a lot more friendly when it comes to target farming specific items. As for Aberrents Call, you can go to the Stolen Lands timeline and farm staff, unique / set echo rewards, and it is a very common unique from that source. For the idols, it can start dropping from level 20 and higher. So you can farm idol echo reward monoliths, or you can just randomly drop it. So you will eventually drop one or get lucky early on leveling, or if you just play a different build long enough, you'll get one. To level this build, I am leaving a leveling guide in the description that I made the other day specifically for this build. After you reach monoliths with summoned volatile zombie, you can either stay with zombies or swap to any other minion build, as Necromancer has a lot of good options in 0.9 thanks to all the changes. You can play Bone Retaliation Golem, Fire Aura Golem, Summon Abomination, and a myriad of other options, which I'll be linking all three of these down below to give you a good idea of what to play until you get the required items. If you end up enjoying the content or learning something new, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video or subscribing to the channel, as that's the best way to show me that you want more content like this. Now, with that lengthy intro out of the way, summon wraiths. Why are they strong? Well, not only can you have up to 17 to 19 of them, they all do large amounts of minion spell damage, which is an archetype that is heavily supported right now. When you fully min-max this build, it is one of the smoothest T4 Drilla farmers that ever existed. If you want to see a full min-max version, I'll be leaving a link to this video down below, as I'd heavily suggest watching that one as well, because that's essentially the evolution of what is in this video, and you should be going for that version as a goal. Now, what you're seeing on screen right now is about 12 hours worth of gameplay, as I wanted to keep it short. Another reason why they are so strong is the fact that you can make them stationary. Minion AI in Last Epoch is very inconsistent, especially AI for melee minions. But if you make Wraiths range with the Flame Wraith idol, and you can also make them stand still with this node, you end up doing a lot more DPS over a set amount of time, because they spend much less time moving around and doing a lot more time killing enemies, which is what you want. One of the problems of the build is that Wraiths are always decaying thanks to Aberrents Call and Wraiths' innate decay that they have. Thankfully, Wraiths have some of the highest leech stats in the game thanks to all the leech on crit sources from River of Bones and inside its skill tree. This means as long as your Wraiths are attacking something, they will last a lot longer than they normally would. This is even better in boss fights when they're always able to be leeching because there's always enemies to be attacking. One thing I want to note is there is a bug currently with summon Wraiths and Lagan, where if you do not place them properly, their projectiles will be deleted. Make sure to put the Wraiths directly on the ledge nearest Lagan, and you won't have this issue. It was very amusing to find this bug and wonder why it was taking me so long to kill him. Lagan keeps showing us that it is by far one of the buggiest boss fights in ARPG history. With all that being said, let's go in game so I could talk about this build in a little bit more detail. Alright, here we are in game with the character, of course, Flame Wraith Necromancer. Let's talk about the skills, shall we? So, for Summon Wraith specifically, the first few points you want to take is 1 point into Locus of Resurrection. Normally, Wraiths they summon at where you are at, but grabbing this node means that you can summon them at a target location. Then, of course, 1 point into Locus of Death, making it so that Wraiths cannot move, but it literally doubles their damage, so we really don't care. Now, of course, this node is terrible unless if you have, of course, the Flame Wraith idols or the Poison Wraith idols, and you make sure that your Flame Wraiths are ranged, which Flame Wraiths are ranged, thankfully. Now, of course, we take 3 points travel into Reapers. Eventually, we want 5 out of 5 if you get enough plus levels to Wraiths. 3 points in Necrotic Hunters, 60% more necrotic damage, We get a lot of necrotic damage flat from Reapers. We get a lot of necrotic damage flat from, of course, Dreadshade as well. So all of that combined makes us 60% more damage, probably around like 30 to 40% more damage. Also, of course, they leech a lot more from necrotic damage as well, so this is just free damage. Then 4 points into Wraithbringer, making the mana cost a lot less and making the cast speed a lot higher, makes it so that we can essentially spam Wraiths much faster than normal, making it so that it feels good. Now we have 2 points into Flame Wraith. This will give us about, it's going to be much less damage than this in the patch, going to be 10% more damage, but that's because this is bugged and it's not actually giving you 30% more damage right now. Whoopoo. Of course, we get 22% Flame Wraith chance. Now, once we get at least one idol with at least 26%, half of our wraiths will be Flame Wraiths, right? Which is good enough until you, of course, get another idol, which then you can get up to 100%. You can kind of mess around with half of your wraiths being fire, and then eventually you can fix that later on with more idols. 1 point into Spirit Link because we want that base crit. And then 3 points in the Dawn of the Fall. We want even more base crit. Also, crit damage leeches health is very strong, as it keeps our wraiths alive as they're sitting there wailing on enemies. Then 2 out of 3 points in the Dusk of the Living. Eventually went 3 out of 3. If you have enough plus points, it's behind my head. There you go. It's right here. There you go. Then, of course, 4 points into Delay the End for less decay, meaning that they'll stay there longer. And the only thing that's really decaying them is, of course, Aberrents Call. Now, normally, you only have access to about, I think, 6 wraiths, but if you come up here and grab 2 more, you can have 2 more wraiths, right, which is great, and you can have 8 wraiths, and that means that you can play this build without Aberrents Call, which is great. So that's cool. So if you don't have Aberrents Call yet, I'd heavily suggest grabbing these extra wraiths, as it's a lot of extra DPS, as you can get like about 4 wraiths with like the lowest mineral idol, which is fine. Aura of Decay, the whole point of Aura of Decay is we're putting it on Numlock. If you don't know what Numlock is, just look it up on YouTube. There's a lot of guides on Numlock. But TLDR, we Numlock it, and we constantly turn it off and on. Why is that? Well, thankfully, one of the nodes inside Aura of Decay, Respite, gives us 200% increased health regen on Deactivate. Meaning, as it deactivates, it just gives us 200% health regen, which is a lot of health regen when you're scaling health regen on a health regen build, which is great. Cool. That's the only thing you need to know about this. Of course, grab Absence of Life and less poison damage taken. But other than that, mainly just Respite is the most important part. It could be anything else. Doesn't really matter, really. And of course, Drain Life. Drain Life is a much more interesting setup than what I would normally do. So most of the time with these kind of builds, I just use Rip Blood with the mana gain back on it to gain mana back. After I'm like, of course, casting a bunch of wraiths. But I've been testing and messing around with Drain Life as we put them on minions, right? And I essentially have infinite mana. Now, this does deal a decent amount of damage to wraiths, but as you can tell, while we're doing damage to enemies, it doesn't really matter. The Drain Life doesn't really do that much damage to the wraiths when, of course, we have them leeching, which is great, right? That's always great. So this is like the setup. TLDR, we grab Dark Shackles so that it's cast on the ground. We grab Grass of the Dam so we get additional targets. Then we grab Grim Harvest so that it targets minions and we get mana per second when we're damaging minions. And then, of course, we grab Necrotic Feast so it only targets minions. Now, one really cool thing about this is even with the low amount of damage that we're dealing with Drain Life, it's actually supplementing our Leech and Sustain, as we're actually getting a decent amount of leech from, of course, leeching on 17 wraiths at once. Like when we have like 17 wraiths, we actually have a decent amount of regen, which is very interesting. One thing I would like to note, if your wraiths are dying and you're having problems with that, one node you can take out is Symbiotic Apparition so that you're not afflicted by Dreadshade, meaning you deal less damage with your Drain's life, which means that you're not killing your wraiths as quickly. That's one little thing to note if you're having problems with that. And of course, Dreadshade here, we take 2 points travel into Spectral Presence, 1 point to Lone Watcher. It makes it so that we no longer drain health, but we can only have 1 Dreadshade, which is fine. 3 points into Dying Coven for the increased attack and cast speed. We want so much cast speed as possible with Wraiths because we want them to shoot as fast as possible. 4 points to Grim Fate for 60% more damage. 1 point into Symbiotic Apparition, so that we're affected by this cast speed, so we can pump out Wraiths more often. But I'm kind of thinking about dumping this node, to be honest. We might actually just dump this node. Then 3 points into Flesh Harvest to give us more buff effect as our Wraiths take damage, which will make all of our other Wraiths deal more damage, which is great. A 1 point travel into Wisdom of the Dead, 1 point to Martyrdom. That's because we have a node in Symbiotic Apparition, meaning that we get a bunch of armor from our Dreadshade. Then 4 points into Lingering Doom for a bunch of extra necrotic flat damage, which then, of course, synergizes really well with Necrotic Hunger, which is cool. Then for Transplant's tree is changing in the next patch. I will have Transplant's tree in the description. It's a very normal tree for Transplant. There's a buff / a nerf going on with Transplant, but it's like the same utility skill. Technically, you don't need this, but I like it for teleportation. Eventually, you could technically use Summon Skeletal Mage with the new node that's coming in to teleport your minions with you, but it will not teleport stationary minions. So you'll just get 5 extra minions with Skeletal Mages, which is really cool. But yeah, that's like one option later on, but that will be down in the description in a planner. Now, for passives here, just generic passives, the usual stuff, vitality, minion health, stuff like that, cast speed, which is great. We take 10 points in Apocrypha for the intelligence, because more intelligence means more base minion life that Wraiths will get, and more damage the Wraiths will do, which is great. And we can get up all the way to Aura of Decay, because that's one of the best things about a regen build on an Acolyte. Then for Necromancer here, 8 points to Risen Armory because cast speed. We want the 8 points in Aegis Fall for the armor shred. Eventually 8 points to Blood Armor, because not only does it help with our degens on our Wraiths, it also gives us a lot of increased health regen as well, which is great. 8 points into Tyrant because we want more max life right now, especially when we don't have a vessel. 5 points into Frantic Summons for even more cast speed for you and your minions. 5 points to River of Bones, as that gives our Wraiths a lot of sustain. This is the main reason why our Wraiths actually survive for so long. Then 10 points into Moonlight Pyre for a lot of flat for free. Eventually 10 points into Rite of Undeath. Eventually 8 points into Cling to Life. Then 4 points into Empty the Graves for a lot of increased health regen per minion. We can get up to 17, so that's about 136% regen and a lot of flat armor. So this is a really good node for us for this specific build. And that's pretty much it. Eventually we can move into Blazer for Alone, make them do more minion crit multi. We could try putting points into Heresy for int and minion crit. All of that combined will make you feel even better. Now, of course, for the gear, the mandatory pieces of gear are, of course, 1 Wraith Idol. You want to at least have a high rolled one, but you can kind of deal with a low rolled one for a bit. You want to be able to add it up to 100% increased 100% chance for summon of Flame Wraith instead. So we always get Flame Wraiths, which is great. And the other mandatory piece to make this build feel good is an Aberrents Call. Aberrents Call are really low level, and it's really easy to get LP on these. Very easy. You want minion spell damage and cast speed on them. They're like the best mods. This is one of the strongest items in the entire build, as it lets you have more Wraiths, and it gives you plus to Wraiths, gives you a bunch of increased minion damage and mana regen as well, which is great. Helmet, just crit. Mainly we need crit on our pieces of gear, just minion crit, so we can eventually get more crit. The adaptive spell damage is really strong as well. Just all of our other pieces, just regen in life wherever we can put it. Eventually want even more health regen everywhere and get base health regen on the helmet, which would help a lot with our regen as well. So there's a lot of different places to get regen. Like I said, if you want a more finished product, I would heavily suggest watching the other video. That video is not going to be invalidated by next patch. All of that video is going to be correct, so you can just watch that video as well if you want more info on this build. All that being said, that's gonna be the end of the video.